Dubai. A city of ambition, wealth, and endless possibilities. Among the high-rises and opulent mansions, stories of success and glamour unfold daily. But occasionally, there are stories of personal choices, choices that carry consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. This is the story of Robert Hayes, a successful expatriate living what many would call a dream life. But one choice would change everything. Robert arrived in Dubai in 2013, a British financial executive eager to make his mark in one of the most competitive industries. He was sharp, focused, and determined, attributes that propelled him to the top of his field. His life was meticulously planned, from his career trajectory to his family life back home in London. For years, Robert balanced the demands of a high-stakes career and a family who admired his dedication. His wife, Anna, and their children were his anchor, waiting for his return during visits to the UK. To outsiders, his life seemed enviable. But living away from family has its challenges, and in the glittering lights of Dubai, temptation is never far away. Amid the glitz and glamour, Robert's world shifted one evening at an exclusive networking event. It was there he met Nadia, a young and ambitious marketing professional. She was captivating, intelligent, and undeniably magnetic. At first, their meetings were strictly professional. She was charming and resourceful, someone who shared his drive for success. But soon, their conversations extended beyond work, into late-night texts and stolen moments. Lines were crossed. And before long, their relationship evolved into something far more personal. Robert rented an apartment in a quiet neighborhood, away from prying eyes. It became their sanctuary, a place where the world outside ceased to exist. But maintaining two lives required careful planning, and for Robert, it came with mounting risks. Every call home to Anna became an exercise in composure. Every dinner with colleagues a potential exposure. But for Robert, the allure of Nadia outweighed the potential fallout, until it didn't. Their relationship thrived in secrecy, but secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of surfacing. And in a city where reputations are everything, the cost of discovery could be devastating. What began as an escape would soon become an inescapable nightmare. This is the story of a man caught between loyalty and desire, and a decision that would lead to devastating consequences. Robert Hayes believed he had mastered the delicate art of compartmentalizing his life. At work, he was a respected professional, a man others turned to for leadership. At home, during video calls with his wife and children, he was the picture of a devoted husband and father. And yet, in a secluded part of the city, he lived another reality, a life built on fragile secrecy. His relationship with Nadia began to take on a rhythm of its own. There were weekend getaways to nearby Emirates, quiet dinners at unassuming restaurants, and long conversations that delved deeper into their personal lives. Nadia's presence was more than intoxicating, it was an escape from the relentless expectations of his public life. But as the months passed, managing this double life became an increasingly precarious balancing act. Robert's absences grew longer, and his excuses to Anna became less convincing. He started missing family events, birthdays, anniversaries, offering vague explanations about urgent work demands. The once calm tone of their calls grew strained, with Anna's voice carrying an undercurrent of suspicion. Meanwhile, Nadia, unaware of the full scope of Robert's deception, began pressing for more commitment. She spoke about the future, the possibility of building a life together, free from the constraints of secrecy. She wanted to meet his friends, his colleagues, anything to make their relationship feel less like a fleeting secret and more like a tangible reality. For Robert, these moments were a cruel reminder of the walls he had built around his life. He reassured Nadia with empty promises, skillfully deflecting her questions while carefully guarding the truth. To her, he was the man who made her feel seen, cherished, and understood. To his wife, he was slowly becoming a distant shadow of the partner she once knew. Still, Robert convinced himself that he could manage the growing cracks in his carefully constructed world. He started micromanaging every detail of his life, calendars, emails, even his social media presence. He changed passwords frequently and kept 2 phones, one for his family and another for Nadia. Every outing, every interaction, was meticulously planned to avoid detection. But it wasn't enough. Secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of revealing themselves. It began with a small slip, a credit card charge for a dinner he had claimed was a business expense. Anna noticed it while reviewing their statements and questioned him. Robert shrugged it off, explaining it away with a practiced ease, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over time, Anna's unease grew. She started paying closer attention, checking his social media posts, observing his tone during their calls, even probing subtly into his work schedule. She didn't have concrete proof yet, but she could feel that something was wrong. At the same time, Nadia's patience was wearing thin. The clandestine nature of their relationship, which had once felt exciting, now felt suffocating. She began voicing her frustrations, questioning why Robert seemed so reluctant to take the next step. He deflected her concerns with a charm that had worked so many times before, but even he knew the facade was beginning to crack. The demands of living 2 lives started taking a toll on Robert. He became more irritable, more paranoid. He avoided colleagues outside of work, fearing that even casual conversations might somehow lead to exposure. He started sleeping less, his mind racing with the constant need to stay ahead of the lies. But despite his best efforts, he couldn't see the storm that was building around him. One evening, during a rare moment of calm, Robert found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him was a stranger, worn, hollow, and consumed by the weight of his choices. For the first time, he questioned whether the life he had built with Nadia was worth the risk. But even then, he couldn't bring himself to stop. And so, the lies continued, weaving a web that grew more intricate with each passing day. Robert didn't know it yet, but the foundation of his double life was already beginning to crumble. All it would take was a single spark to bring everything crashing down. The moment came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Robert had just returned home from a long day at work when his phone buzzed, his personal phone. Nadia had sent him a message, one of many, but this one carried an unusual urgency. Her words were brief but alarming: "We need to talk. Now." Robert felt his chest tighten. He had grown accustomed to managing Nadia's concerns, brushing them off with reassurances and promises of a future that always seemed just out of reach. But this message was different. Something in her tone told him that this wasn't just frustration. This was something bigger. As Robert sat in his apartment, phone in hand, he didn't know that Anna was also having a revelation of her own. While tidying the house back in London, she had stumbled upon an email, an auto-forward from one of Robert's lesser-used accounts. It was addressed to a name she didn't recognize, Nadia. The subject line read, "Last night was unforgettable." Anna's heart sank. She opened the email, her hands trembling, and as she read the words on the screen, the reality of her husband's betrayal hit her like a tidal wave. The affectionate language, the intimate details, it was undeniable proof of Robert's infidelity. Her mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Who was this woman? And why hadn't she seen the signs sooner? Meanwhile, Robert was heading to meet Nadia. They had agreed on a quiet cafe away from their usual spots, a place where they could talk without drawing attention. Nadia had been growing increasingly restless, and Robert feared that she was close to making an ultimatum. But as he sat across from her, listening to her speak, he realized her concerns were far graver than he had anticipated. Nadia revealed that she had been followed recently, first by a car she didn't recognize and then by a man who appeared outside her building late at night. She admitted that she felt unsafe, as though someone was watching her. Robert dismissed her fears initially, blaming the paranoia on the stress of their situation. But Nadia wasn't convinced. She showed him her phone, a series of missed calls from an unknown number, messages that were cryptic and unsettling. Robert reassured her that he would handle it, but inside, he felt the first cracks of fear. Had Anna hired someone to follow Nadia? Had one of his colleagues discovered his secret? He didn't know who to trust anymore, and the walls around his carefully constructed life seemed to be closing in. Back in London, Anna made the decision to confront Robert. She booked a flight to Dubai under the guise of a surprise visit, but in her heart, she knew this trip wasn't about reconciliation. She spent the flight preparing herself for what she might uncover, replaying their years together in her mind, trying to make sense of how they had arrived at this point. When Anna arrived at Robert's apartment, her unannounced presence caught him off guard. He greeted her with a forced smile, but she could see the tension in his eyes. Over dinner, Anna tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but her questions grew sharper, more pointed. Robert deflected as best he could, but Anna wasn't buying it. She had come for answers, and she was determined to get them. Later that evening, when Robert stepped out to take a call, Anna seized the opportunity to search his apartment. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but deep down, she knew she would find it. In a drawer by his desk, she found a stack of receipts, hotel stays, dinners for two, gifts that didn't align with anything he had ever mentioned. And then, tucked beneath the receipts, she found a second phone. As Anna scrolled through the messages on the phone, her worst fears were confirmed. There were dozens of texts between Robert and Nadia, each one more damning than the last. Anna felt a wave of anger and betrayal, but she also felt a strange sense of clarity. The truth was finally in front of her, and there was no denying it. When Robert returned to the apartment, he found Anna waiting for him, the phone in her hand. Her expression was a mix of heartbreak and fury. "How long has this been going on, Robert?" she demanded. Robert froze, the color draining from his face. He tried to explain, to justify, to beg for forgiveness, but Anna wasn't interested in his excuses. For her, the damage had been done. The confrontation was explosive, the kind of argument that neighbors would later describe as impossible to ignore. Words were shouted, accusations were hurled, and by the end of the night, Robert's double life had been laid bare. He had lost control of the narrative, and now, he was at the mercy of the fallout. Anna left Dubai the next day, but not before making it clear that their marriage was over. She didn't care about the logistics or the legalities, she just wanted to be free of the man who had betrayed her. And as the plane took off, Anna felt a sense of liberation, even as the pain of Robert's betrayal lingered. But for Robert, the nightmare was only beginning. With Anna gone and Nadia growing increasingly unstable, the walls of his world were crumbling faster than he could rebuild them. And the choices he made next would seal his fate forever. With Anna gone, Robert found himself facing the full weight of his actions. The once controlled, meticulously planned life he had built now lay in ruins. For a brief moment, he considered cutting ties with Nadia entirely, walking away from the chaos and trying to salvage what remained of his career and reputation. But that thought was fleeting. Nadia's presence in his life had become more than just an affair. It was an obsession. Over the next few weeks, Robert's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He began spending more time with Nadia, desperate to maintain their connection. But the more time they spent together, the more volatile their relationship became. Nadia, who had once been Robert's escape, now seemed to embody all the pressures and conflicts he had been trying to avoid. Arguments between them became more frequent, more heated, and more dangerous. One evening, during a particularly tense confrontation, Nadia accused Robert of using her, of making promises he never intended to keep. She threatened to expose their relationship, to go public with everything she knew. For Robert, this was the ultimate nightmare. His professional life, his remaining social connections, and even his legal status in Dubai could be jeopardized by such a revelation. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to end things with her. He was trapped, ensnared by his own decisions. Desperation drove Robert to make a decision he would later regret. He began taking steps to control the situation, trying to silence Nadia's growing frustrations. He showered her with gifts, expensive jewelry, luxury vacations, anything to keep her appeased. But no amount of money or material possessions could erase the damage that had been done. Nadia wasn't interested in being placated. She wanted answers, and she wanted a future with Robert. The tension between them was becoming unbearable. Meanwhile, whispers of Robert's affair began circulating among his colleagues. Rumors spread quickly in Dubai's tight-knit expatriate community, and it wasn't long before questions began to surface. A coworker mentioned seeing Robert and Nadia together at a secluded beach resort. Another noticed his increasingly distracted behavior during meetings. The facade Robert had worked so hard to maintain was beginning to crack, and he knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to light. The breaking point came on a quiet Thursday evening. Robert had promised to meet Nadia at her apartment to discuss their future, but he arrived late, already on edge from a grueling day at work. Nadia, frustrated and hurt, confronted him the moment he walked through the door. She demanded to know why he continued to keep her hidden, why he wouldn't commit to the life they had talked about for so long. The argument escalated quickly. Voices were raised, accusations flew, and in the heat of the moment, Robert said something he could never take back. He told Nadia that their relationship had been a mistake, that it had ruined his life. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Nadia, stunned and devastated, responded with tears and anger. She threatened once again to expose their affair, to tell everyone the truth. In a moment of panic, Robert lashed out. The details of what happened next remain unclear, even to investigators. But what is known is that the confrontation turned physical. Neighbors later reported hearing shouting, the sound of something breaking, and then silence. When the police arrived hours later, they found Nadia's lifeless body in the apartment. Robert was nowhere to be found. The aftermath of the incident sent shockwaves through Dubai. News of Nadia's death spread quickly, and as details of her relationship with Robert began to emerge, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters speculated about Robert's whereabouts, his motives, and the events that had led to the tragedy. For many, the story was a chilling reminder of how quickly passion can turn into violence. Robert, now a fugitive, managed to evade authorities for several days. He moved between hotels, using false names and cash to avoid detection. But his attempts to escape justice were short-lived. He was eventually apprehended at a remote border checkpoint, his appearance disheveled and his demeanor unrecognizable from the confident executive he had once been. During his interrogation, Robert provided a fragmented account of the events leading up to Nadia's death. He claimed it had been an accident, a moment of anger that had spiraled out of control. But the evidence told a different story. Bruises on Nadia's body, signs of a struggle, and the shattered remains of a wine glass all pointed to a violent altercation. The prosecution painted a picture of a man driven by desperation, willing to do anything to protect his secrets. In court, Robert sat expressionless as witnesses recounted the unraveling of his double life. Friends and colleagues described him as distant, paranoid, and increasingly unhinged in the weeks leading up to the incident. Anna, who had returned to Dubai to attend the trial, refused to look at him. For her, the man on trial was no longer the husband she had once loved, but a stranger who had destroyed their family. The trial ended with a guilty verdict. Robert was sentenced to life in prison, a fitting punishment for a man whose choices had led to such devastating consequences. As he was led away in handcuffs, he made no statement, no apology. The life he had so carefully constructed was gone, reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. The investigation into Nadia's death began immediately, led by Dubai's Criminal Investigation Department. The evidence collected from the scene told a grim story. Broken furniture, blood splatters, and signs of a struggle painted a picture of a confrontation that had turned violent. The shattered remnants of a wine glass near Nadia's body were a particularly damning clue, as investigators determined it had been used as a weapon during the altercation. Forensic teams meticulously combed through the apartment, piecing together the final moments of Nadia's life. Her phone, recovered from the living room floor, revealed the tension in her relationship with Robert in the weeks leading up to her death. Messages filled with pleas for honesty, unanswered calls, and cryptic texts from an unknown sender raised even more questions about the pressures she had been facing. Robert, captured days after the incident, was brought in for questioning. At first, he denied any involvement, claiming he had left Nadia's apartment before anything happened. But under the weight of mounting evidence, his story began to crumble. Investigators presented surveillance footage from a nearby building that showed Robert entering Nadia's apartment just hours before the incident. Witness testimony from neighbors, who reported hearing loud arguments and a crash, further contradicted his claims. As the evidence mounted, the prosecution built a narrative around Robert's actions. They argued that his desperation to silence Nadia and prevent her from exposing their affair had driven him to commit an act of violence. His lawyer attempted to portray the incident as a tragic accident, the result of a heated argument that spiraled out of control. But the details didn't align. The injuries Nadia sustained, coupled with the deliberate attempts to flee the scene, painted a much darker picture. The trial itself became a spectacle, drawing international attention. The story of an affluent expatriate caught in a web of deceit and tragedy captivated audiences worldwide. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal experts, and members of Dubai's tight-knit expatriate community. Each day brought new revelations, adding layers of complexity to an already harrowing case. One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Nadia's family took the stand. Her parents, who had flown in from Lebanon, spoke through tears about their daughter's kindness, ambition, and the dreams she had left behind. Her mother clutched a photo of Nadia as she described her heartbreak at losing a child in such a senseless manner. Their testimony served as a poignant reminder of the human cost of Robert's actions. The defense, meanwhile, sought to shift the narrative. They argued that Nadia's threats to expose the affair had placed Robert under immense psychological strain, pushing him to act irrationally. They called upon character witnesses, friends and former colleagues of Robert, who described him as a man of integrity, someone who had been overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. But the prosecution was quick to dismantle these claims, presenting evidence of Robert's meticulous planning to hide his double life. As the trial progressed, it became clear that Robert's carefully constructed image was unraveling. Emails and texts revealed the extent of his deceit, not just with Anna and Nadia, but with colleagues and friends as well. Financial records showed extravagant spending on gifts and trips with Nadia, further reinforcing the narrative of a man who had gone to great lengths to maintain his secret life. In the final days of the trial, the prosecution presented its closing argument, a powerful condemnation of Robert's actions. They described him as a man driven by selfishness, someone who had placed his desires above the well-being of everyone around him. They argued that Nadia's death was not the result of a momentary lapse in judgment, but a culmination of deliberate choices that had placed her in harm's way. The defense countered with a plea for leniency, emphasizing Robert's lack of a prior criminal record and his apparent remorse for what had happened. They urged the court to consider the emotional toll the situation had taken on him, portraying him as a man who had lost everything and would live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. The verdict, when it was finally delivered, brought a sense of closure to some and devastation to others. Robert was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke of the gravity of his actions and the irreparable harm caused to Nadia's family. The courtroom was silent as Robert was led away, his expression a mix of resignation and defeat. For Nadia's family, the verdict was a bittersweet moment. While justice had been served, it could never bring back the daughter they had lost. For Anna, the trial marked the end of a chapter she had never imagined would be part of her life. And for Robert, it was the beginning of a new existence, one defined by the choices he had made and the consequences he could never escape. The transition from a life of luxury and influence to the confines of a prison cell was stark. Robert Hayes, once a man of stature and respect, now lived among criminals, reduced to a number in the system. His days were spent reflecting on the decisions that had brought him here, each memory a painful reminder of the life he had destroyed, not just his own, but the lives of those who had trusted him. For Anna, the aftermath of the trial was equally challenging. The man she had once loved was now a stranger, someone she struggled to reconcile with the memories of their life together. She filed for divorce shortly after the verdict, determined to rebuild her life and protect her children from the fallout of Robert's actions. Moving back to London, she sought solace in her family and friends, though the scars of betrayal lingered. Nadia's family, too, struggled to move forward. Her parents returned to Lebanon, carrying the weight of their loss with them. They established a foundation in her name, dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence and raising awareness about the dangers of secrecy and control in relationships. For them, this was a way to honor Nadia's memory and ensure her story could help others avoid a similar fate. The case left a lasting mark on Dubai's expatriate community, sparking conversations about the pressures and temptations faced by those living far from home. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how even the most seemingly successful lives can unravel under the weight of deception. The media continued to cover the story long after the trial had ended, dissecting every detail and examining the cultural dynamics that had contributed to the tragedy. In prison, Robert spent much of his time in isolation, avoiding interactions with other inmates. He rarely spoke to anyone, his once charismatic demeanor replaced by a quiet resignation. Reports from guards described him as cooperative but withdrawn, a man consumed by regret. He occasionally wrote letters to Anna and his children, though they remained unanswered. It was clear that his connection to the outside world had been severed, a consequence of the choices he had made. One of the most haunting aspects of Robert's story was how preventable it all seemed in hindsight. The affair, the lies, the violence, each decision had been a step down a path he could have chosen to avoid. But for Robert, the allure of secrecy and the desire to control every aspect of his life had blinded him to the inevitable consequences. And in the end, it had cost him everything. The lessons from this case extend far beyond the individuals involved. It serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating impact of betrayal. For many who followed the story, it was a wake-up call, a prompt to reflect on their own lives, their relationships, and the choices they make. As the years passed, the memory of Robert Hayes faded from the headlines, but the story of Nadia and the tragedy that unfolded in that Dubai apartment remained etched in the minds of those who knew her. Her friends described her as vibrant and full of life, a woman who had dreams and aspirations that were cut short by someone who claimed to care for her. In a rare interview years later, Anna spoke about her journey to rebuild her life. She described the process as painful but necessary, a way to ensure her children could grow up without the shadow of their father's actions hanging over them. "I had to learn to let go of the anger," she said. "It was the only way I could move forward. But I'll never forget what happened, and I'll never let my children forget either. They deserve to know the truth." For Robert, the truth was something he could no longer avoid. Every day, he was confronted by the reality of what he had done, a reality that no amount of wealth or influence could erase. His story became a symbol of the dangers of living a double life, a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control when honesty is abandoned. And so, the story of Robert Hayes and Nadia came to an end, not with redemption, but with lessons that would echo for years to come. A life built on lies can never stand, and the choices we make, no matter how small, have the power to shape not just our lives but the lives of everyone around us. This has been the story of a man whose ambition and desires led him down a path of destruction. If this case resonates with you or you've learned something valuable from it, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories like this, stories that remind us of the complexities of human nature and the importance of truth in our lives. Thank you for listening.